So, as usual, we will wait a few moments before we start. Well, Zach, look on stream. Indeed. Very important topic. Okay, I think we can start. Today we want to talk about compositions, how to work on them, what you can do, what you could keep in mind, and why to use them in the first place. I mean, every image has a composition, but an image is usually elevated when you actually think about where and how to place your elements. And that's what we want to look at today. There are 4 major parts to this on how you can construct a composition, which we will go over one by one. First is focal points, focal elements, followed by the structure of your image. After that, the balance, and last but not least, the storytelling, which we will go into detail later on. Okay, let's start with our first point, which is focal points of focal elements. Focal points of focal elements are the elements of your image where you want your viewer to look at, where the focus should be on. You can do this with a bunch of different techniques. One is very common. I really like to use it, for example, contrast. I have here some examples. This Regaliceratops, for example, is way lighter than its surrounding here. It's a very obvious way of doing this because here it's also an albino specimen. So that's easily done. Another example would be this with an artificial light source where the creature you are supposed to look at is brightly lit by some flashlight, for example. Other ways of getting the attention of your viewer is with saturation. In this example, for example, we have Papilionictis, which is a very small fish that I have here brightly colored, and it really sticks out against the more... Oops. Thank you, Shami, for the host. And it really sticks out against the more muted colors of the background. This is of course very obvious because it's also in the middle and everything. But imagine, for example, something like a burned forest, and everything is colored in ash except the little creature that walks through it, that has cleaned itself and it's now much more brightly colored in comparison to its surrounding. After that, focus. So working with blur, motion blur, or in general sharpness of your image can help getting a focus, get a clear focal point in. In my case here, with this ammonite and the mosasaur next to it, you see that I worked with a blur filter over the front of the snout as well as the back, so that your focus is mostly in this area here, where we have the eye of the mosasaur and the tentacles and eye of the ammonite. And stuff like the barnacles, for example, on the shell are stuff you might only notice afterwards. So that's very helpful to keep in mind. You can also work with motion blur, for example, so you have stuff very quickly moving by, only a smear basically, but you maybe have a few elements in the center that are very clear because they are unmoving, or the other way around, that you have something moving and everything else is sitting still, and that way it's more easily seen. I have here an example where I used lots of movement in this erythrosuchid that comes here in with the mud and everything. It's not the best example when it comes to using motion or movement, but I rarely use stuff like that anyway, so I was a little bit grasping for straws when it comes to this. But you can see how your eye is following the line of the animal here, and the motion that it creates gets your attention. You are looking much more at the Retrosuchid than at the Eupacaria that is running by here, and that is its prey. This has also to do again with stuff like color. The Eupacaria here has much more the color of the mud than the Erythrosuchid. Also, something that is important here are guiding elements or guiding lines. Like you see, you can follow here. The wool animal basically has one sweeping motion in it, and you might remember that we talked about something like this on our video on gesture drawings. Also, when you have seen, for example, our last stream on values, color values, and stuff like that, this will be very helpful if you have seen that beforehand. Guiding elements don't have to be obvious, and they can come in different ways. In this case, for example, this Papilio-venator here in its nest, you see here how the darkness behind us frames the animal, and how the tail here is swooping around and basically points back at the head of the creature. This helps to keep the focus on the eye of the little troodontid here. Also, of course, that the eye is very bright blue helps, while the rest is yellow brownish. So here several things come together. To even deepen this effect, I could now go in and, for example, make the outer edges of the nest material here slightly blurry to even further draw you in. But yeah, everybody has their own preferences in this. Another example here is this Ichthyornis, where I see the shadow of a branch here going through, basically coming from left and right and pointing into the eye area. Same with the pattern here on the neck going up, and the baby looking upwards and everything. So the image very much lives from the constant back and forth you have as a viewer between mother and child here, and all of that is framed by these dark elements in the foreground, these branches, so that you are even more restricted in your field of view, basically. This stuff, it's not pretty, it's not necessary, but it helps you to guide your eye towards the middle here. Also with this stuff like these little dark branches in the foreground that, again, guide your eye kind of towards the eye of the animal. One last example for how to use structure and, for example, framing elements is this Ticodontosaurus standing at the entrance of a cave, and you can see here very, very obviously how I used the dark entrance to frame the animal. You could do this even more effective, because now you have this this dark backdrop, and you could make the small sauropodomorph here more brightly lit or lighter in color, again going back to contrast and saturation to get it more across. Or you could put stuff in like a big branch over here, or coming from the tree that again points at this Ticodontosaurus. This all, of course, depends on where you want to put your focal points, or if you want clear focal points at all. Usually it's a good idea to have focal points, but sometimes you want to make it on purpose very vague. like there are a few pieces by John Conway, for example, where he has compositions that misguide you basically on purpose, where you need to look at the image a little longer to really get what's going on, or when the animals, the value of the animals are so similar to its surroundings that they blend very much into it. Very famous, he has some images of dinosaurs that camouflage themselves into their environment, or when the colors are very flat. So like that recent piece he did of brachiosaurs in front of some clouds, and the animals become part of the cloudscape basically. Very much depends on what you want with your image, and we will talk about that later again in the storytelling part. Next point on our list is structure. Giving a structure to your image helps enormously. Let me show you something. You could, in theory, for example, have your image here and then just place randomly elements on it. Very chaotic. Can do that. However, it is usually very boring. You will not get your attention. You don't know where to look first. You just your eye is just aimlessly wandering around. Instead, with the help of focal points, guiding lines, and a structure, you can bring in some order. Like you could have your elements grouped. Now you have, or you can bring in some symmetry, for example. This makes the image very quickly much more engaging, instead of making I mean, it doesn't need to be very much engaging, but it makes it more interesting and pleasing to look at. For some reason, humans like that. So first thing here, there is the so-called rule of thirds. We are looking, with an example here, at this image of Haplocanthosaurus from our Morrison Formation stream, and something that I did here that I will show you in a second is I divided in my head the image in thirds into basically mentally was making markers and was looking for the points where these thirds would meet, because we humans tend to wander within this part of the picture basically. Quickly going back, because I have here much better quick one that I did. You see it's not perfectly on the cross here where these lines meet. However, that doesn't need to be the case. It doesn't need to be perfectly aligned. It is enough when you have stuff like this in that general area. Also, you see I worked a little bit with contrast and saturation, like having the neck of the animal darker here at the top, so it stands against the razor light sky, and here having it lit by the sun against the dark foliage in the background. That way it sticks out more. That's also something we covered in our value study stream. Another thing, so this is a rule of thirds. It's very well known, very often used, very effective in its use. But there's also the less common rule of fifths, where you divide your image, as you can imagine, into fifths. Little thing on the side here, what you can do to get these structures into your image, especially when you do it digitally, you use this selection tool, and then you just go here to the side, and here you can select from a number of options how you want the selection to be divided. So I have now here the rule of thirds selected. Bloop. Ooh. Don't press enter or click again, because then you will no longer see these lines here. But now you can go to the side, bloop, and get these guiding lines in. So you have a fixed underlying structure you can then draw over. Having this early on in the planning of your composition can be very helpful. Okay, next example I have here is diagonals. Diagonals are great because they give your image something dynamic. In general, when you have stuff like verticals and horizontals, it makes an image usually more calm, and having diagonals in here makes it feel like there is much more going on. You could now take this piece, rotate it so that the animals are going basically completely horizontal. Let's do that. Oop. Let's see if we can take part of that image. There. Much less interesting. It's this while when we go back, you see there is more action going on here. Again, this is also, you can combine all these things, because you see here I played with the contrast, having the shadow of the tree surrounding it also in diagonals going in here, so it helps with the overall movement of the image, and it frames this part better. Another thing that should be of interest. Oh wait, no. First here, another example of diagonals used, and again also working with stuff like contrast. Also, you see here this very big, dramatic diagonal of the mountains in the background. Here again, also a little. Another diagonal here to basically work against it, and to also point here into the direction of the animals, and the contrast here, so that the silhouette of head and neck sticks out against the background. You see here basically how it's cradled within this structure, and how the diagonal of the image overall gives it something more dynamic. Also a little bit here in the, you can basically draw a line from this mountain through this rock, and you have two lines crossing, and at that point we have our focal point. Another important thing you can use is symmetry. Here an example that doesn't quite work because this brontosaurus isn't completely in the middle. However, having something like this is usually very pleasing for the human eye. Symmetries overall, also stuff like pyramids, for example, when you have imagine having something like this and then maybe have more brontosaurus surrounding it, another one laying down and coming in like this, leaning in, or maybe here a juvenile on the flank standing there with its neck going up there, so that we have this motion upward. That is something that we humans, for some reason, really like to see. Same also with circles. Pyramids, triangles, and circles work really well. We actually had at some point a wool stream, wool server challenge, where people were supposed to draw animals in triagonal or circular frameworks. Here with a Litronax, here to Leviathan, forming basically a circle. Here a Corytoraptor, and you see here how the crest, the plumage, and the stuff in the background works to form this pyramid-like thing. Oh, that wasn't supposed to be in there. And here with Mongolostegus, where we have the mirroring, so that we have something rather circular. That's something that humans absolutely love to look at. A last thing you can do is go full frame. Full frame means in this case that the only thing in the image really is your subject, the thing you want to show. No background, nothing else. It just fills the wool frame, as the name already implies. I don't really have a good example for this, so I just took Sandovnia here and cut it out, so you get an idea what I am talking about. Lastly, there is a point that isn't that important but can be interesting to use, and that is balance. The different elements of your image have a visual weight, oftentimes especially characterized by their size and contrast to the rest of the image. Let me open new. Like imagine you have flat plane, and over here you have a big Tyrannosaurus just standing there menacingly. This is very unbalanced. If we would weight this, it would clearly go to that side. Especially when the animal, for example, is of a very different color or value compared to the rest of the image. However, you can counter that by, for example, having over here another animal also just standing there, but maybe just a lot darker even, or a lot lighter, so that although it's smaller, it balances out this big creature. That's something. It depends on what you are going for again with your image, but this can help a lot to make your image feel more pleasing to the eye. Here, for example, is Velocisaurus, a Noasaurid, and together together with two alvarezsaurs in a burrow, and you have basically it's a lot of dark, but here you have the light coming from the entrance, and it would be very much drawn to this side, but there is reflection going on the plumage of the alvarezsaurs and the velocisaurus in the middle here, and that balances it out. Similar in this case here, where we see the skull of Indosaurus and some lava here in the background, where you have this lava fall that is very prominent, but then you have like the reflections here on the skull and everything, and the smaller lava streams that help you keep the composition from being too heavily based up here. Although this, of course, probably the most dramatic part of the image. Here, then, lastly, an example on how not to do it, showing a family of Rynchenia crossing a very shallow lake or big puddle, and you can see here how much more dominant the parent is compared to the juveniles. If you want to make this would want to make this correctly, I now would have made the image much longer and add a little bit further back a lot more juveniles, so you have a big mass of lightly colored juveniles following the father, most likely, which is darker in color. So you have it, as you can expect, a much more balanced feel to the whole composition. At this point, I would like to ask the chat if there are any questions. And Trodan, yes, this is going to be on YouTube. Ah, okay. Zach has a question. Ask away. Oh, is it possible for an image to have one particular focus point or multiple? Yes, you can have more than one focal point. That's absolutely possible. It is usually advised to have only a few, but this also again depends on what you want to do with your image. I can give you here an example. Say you want to create a big mural for a museum that spans over several meters. Form it like this, and you're standing in front of it. Having only one focal point, like over here, would be horrible. You would totally lose the viewer, because everything else is just there to accentuate that one point. So it can be, in these cases, good to have a lot of focal points, sometimes even to divide your image into several sub-compositions, basically, to better deal with it. Like have a big tree here in the middle that divides the image into before and after. Stuff like that can be used. So framing elements that divide it further. You can see that, for example, in a big mural that Beth Zakin painted for the museum in Chicago with Sue as a centerpiece. But then there's all this other stuff going on the image with all the Hell Creek flora and fauna. And you again have dividing elements there and several focal points you can look at. Last point on my list of things to look for is probably the most vague of all points, and that is metaphors and storytelling. Because what you want to do with your image hugely influences how you will or should compose it. Like having a lot of diagonals in a scene that should be very calm, that will not work for you. I mean, like having a big tree trunk going through the image here, but then a bunch of dinosaurs here sleeping in the foreground. That is a waste of a good diagonal, because this is supposed to be something calm and not something where you are thinking of actions. Like let's go back. Something like this you could way better have here. The dromaeosaur sit on here, and maybe a prey item down here trying to run away. See, and then you can work with all the other things that we talked about earlier. So your intentions hugely influence how you will compose your image, and that's why it is important to first think about what you want to do with your image, what is the story you want to tell, and how can you effectively tell it. And that's also why I have metaphors in here. Metaphors in this case mean you are using elements that look like something else, like for example having having a Paraceracerium here stand in a forest, and it looks like it's snowing, until you notice it's actually not snow, it's flower petals that are raining from the trees. But you want to evoke the feeling of snow falling. Or when you look at rocks and have animals standing on top here, and the way you paint the rocks, for inspiration you are looking at waterfalls, because you want this downward movement in the rock. So the rock becomes a metaphor for water in this case, a downward movement in it. And you could also go so far to have it a sunset setting with a orange sky, and against that a much cooler contrast here with the rock that isn't hit by this especially reddish light. And so quickly you can do some very interesting things with your compositions, because this can also influence the mood of the image. And that again goes back to storytelling and what you want to do with your piece, what it is supposed to make with people that are looking at it. Storytelling basically is a fundamental thing in building compositions. It's in a way more important than anything I talked about before, because when the storytelling works, when it's really good, all this stuff like focal points and so on become basically obsolete. They can be very important tools to get your viewer where you want to have them in your mind for the storytelling. But in the end, if the story you want to tell with your visual elements really works, a good focal point structure, guiding lines, and so on, no longer are that important. Okay, these are all the points I wanted to talk about. Here they are listed once again. And if you want, I would now invite you to draw with me one potential composition. Yeah, we will see what you guys come up with after the stream. I'm now turning this off and will make a little sketch, and you are very welcome to join in on this. Oh, something I wanted to talk about earlier. Even when you only have a white background and an animal in the foreground, compositional decisions can be made. Like we talked about the rule of thirds, for example. You can on purpose put the head in one of these spots, or like little iguanodon here, or have another points here, like having a sauropod here and the tail is going up there into this focal point. This already can help you making your image look more interesting, even though you only have really one element there. Also, the choice of format can influence a lot how effective your image is. I talked about this earlier with a big mural. How your piece of paper, canvas, and so on is structured can help a lot. And yeah, there are so many things you can do there, and it's often underutilized, but that's not the point of the stream. We might talk about this afterwards. Let's go for a frame like this. Making myself some markings here. And let's say I want an star kit coming at you. Now stuff like working with perspective comes in handy. So if you have seen that stream already, you will have less problem with stuff like this. And let's have some dark forest behind it. Again, something that you might have learned from the value stream. Oh, didn't. Now it picked it up. doing this just in black and white, so some stuff like saturation will not really play into this, but something you could keep in mind in the future. Let's have some branches coming in here, and I'm using them as a way to point at what we see here. And we have some tree here in the foreground. Some bushes again here. Let's make the image overall a little bit darker. There we go. And a little bit of details. And we have created a razor effective image. Now the image is relatively large, so you can add more than one focal point. For example, here where the stems come together, you could have another little animal trying to hide. Maybe getting hit by some light coming through the canopy here. So again, working with contrasts to bring it more out. Also now we could actually go in here. Whoop. And to make it more effective, move it into the place of another rule of thirds point. Of course we have to patch this up, but it's better to, in this early stage, be like, hey, I messed up, I can do better, and improve your composition instead of being butthurt about it and just carrying on. And I can use stuff like this to work in my favor. And that's, I think, it. I'm quite happy with this composition. You can see here we have two major focal points. Here the trees pointing down here, working with contrast to bring out this little mammal. And at the same time we have branches coming in and the rule of thirds working in our favor to really make this us dark here pop. Yeah, this would be everything for tonight, guys. thank you all for being here, and see you. Oh wait, there's a. I see. Let's see if there are still questions before we answer this. Grace is asking if there is a distinction between focus and gaze. Focus is self-explanatory. That's what you try to you try to draw your viewer to their eyes, and gaze is more something that goes over the image. You can when you are really good at it, you can have several focal points, and then work with structure and guiding lines to make your viewer basically gaze over the image and guide him from focal point to focal point. RTC Studios, how would you compose an image with a sense of scale? For that, stuff like contrasts and perspective are really important, oftentimes. It can also be really helpful to have objects of familiar dimensions in your image. That helps you to wrap your mind around it. But when it comes to composition and scale, what would be something good? Yeah, when it comes to contrasts can be great, because like we talked about this in last time already on the values stream, how towards the distance stuff becomes more hazy and sameish in its values. Stuff blends more together. Like if I would put in some hills here in the background, I would make it as one shape, basically. But if I had the hills here very much in the foreground, I would add way more contrast, way more different values and details, and that can help already. Also, stuff like what we talked about here with balance. If you really want to, you instead of working for a balanced composition, you can work against it and make it really unbalanced to give you a sense of that something is overpowering you. Yeah, that's stuff that comes to my mind. Trodon, how do I get ideas of what to draw? Well, everybody has their own ways and preferences to do that. I have, for example, a big folder full of images for inspiration. Actually, 2 folders, one for photography and one for work of other artists that I consume. And yeah, watching documentaries a lot. Sometimes just talking with people can be extremely inspiring. Learning, getting to know other people and what they think of various topics can really bring out very creative thoughts in yourself. So yeah, traveling helps, of course, and very important, having a sketchbook with you and just doodling, just letting the pencil or the pen go wild on the page, because the accidental and sometimes trivial stuff that comes out of this can be very good humus, basically, on which your creativity can grow. Yeah, that's true what Zach says. You never know what might lead to an interesting idea. Okay, I think this would be everything for the stream. If there are other questions, I will also look at that after we are done on Twitch. But yeah, thank you all for being here, and see you potentially in the next stream. Bye bye.